Silvio's reputation as the sensible consigliere falls apart when this scene gets examined. Silvio Dante, usually the family's self-appointed historian, occasionally treats facts the same way the crew treats federal subpoenas, as optional reading. His confident declaration that Richie Aprile did the right thing by disowning his gay son is a masterclass in speaking with authority while possessing absolutely no evidence. The audience, of course, has already seen Richie's son bustling around the house during the wedding preparations, blissfully unaware that his father regards him with the warmth usually reserved for traffic cops and parole officers. Disowned? Hardly. Marginalized? Yes. Richie's thinly veiled contempt is practically a decor choice, but banished? Not even close. Silvio's flaw here is not malice. It is the crew's collective addiction to rumor, delivered with the confidence of scripture. He may simply be parroting some tough guy intention Richie once floated, or he's filling in narrative gaps, the way he does with other baseless gossip, such as the enthusiastic retelling of Adriana's alleged improprieties. Prudence may be Silvio's brand, but even he isn't immune to the group's compulsive myth-making. They all fancy themselves omniscient, right up until the moment they confidently misidentify Quasimodo. There is also the convenient matter of legacy management. Since Richie was a made man destined for execution before Janice preempted the paperwork, the crew needed a neat cover story, hence the sudden enthusiasm for sending Richie to witness protection, a creative solution that spares everyone the need to explain how their plan unraveled at the hands of a fiancé with excellent aim. Reframing Richie as the kind of man who would dramatically sever ties with his son helps maintain the illusion that he's still out there somewhere, glowering and intolerant as ever. A few observers have even suggested Silvio's inconsistencies betray a deeper mystery, perhaps a version of Silvio from some alternate timeline, slipped into the bada bing between episodes, and has been fumbling details ever since. Given the number of narrative oddities he produces, the theory is almost charming. More likely, however, Silvio is simply embellishing, the way the entire crew does when faced with uncomfortable truths. Richie, for all his ferocity, tolerated his son's ballroom dancing with begrudging resignation, rather than outright exile. And if Richie had lived long enough to witness the veto scandal, he would no doubt have performed his usual routine, loudly condemning others while quietly sprinting toward any available closet. One can easily imagine him clutching the sheets in mortified fascination as Fat Dom turned billiards into a contact sport. In short, Silvio didn't lie so much as he participated in the family's preferred pastime, rewriting history so it feels more flattering, more masculine, and far more detached from reality. Don't skip past the soccer field episode. It's the closest The Sopranos ever gets to full-blown slapstick genius. Janice Soprano's brief foray into soccer mom culture remains one of the show's most underappreciated comic masterstrokes. In under a minute, she unleashes a string of lines that would make any sideline parent reconsider their life choices. A sweeping denunciation of losers, a shrill crusade against negatives, unsolicited parenting critiques, and, because subtlety has never been her preferred instrument, a full-throated, "How'd you like it now, bitch?" aimed at someone who probably expected orange slices, not warfare. Yet in the bizarre moral economy of North Jersey, it's Silvio who earns folk hero status for kicking dirt onto home plate like an enraged groundskeeper. Janice, meanwhile, delivers the kind of unhinged commitment that could qualify as performance art. She even refers to Sophia as her own daughter, with such conviction that one almost forgets the girl's actual parentage. The resulting police tackle, blink and you'll miss it slapstick, capped by Tony's magnificently exhausted reaction, ranks among the show's finest moments. For anyone who stumbled upon the episode without context, it might easily pass for a dark comedy rather than a prestige drama. Of course, this is the same woman whose stint as Ralph Cifaretto's self-anointed pimp left a far deeper mark, including on Ralph himself. Survival, in his case, feels more like a clerical oversight of the universe. Janice's foray into anger management also serves as a reminder that even her efforts at self-improvement arrive weaponized. The group circle becomes a stage on which she cheerfully announces her desire to punch the therapist in the face. Naturally, the moment any progress appears, Tony intervenes with the gleeful sabotage of an older brother who has never once considered letting harmony bloom. This is the show's enduring strength. A random, remembered line often turns out not even to be the best one in its own scene. A throwaway warning about people maybe having guns manages to be equal parts absurd and incisive. Somewhere in the chaos stands poor Sophia, the lone figure deserving genuine sympathy. Whether Janice's ferocity toward the children comes from true protectiveness or merely a compulsive need to inhabit whatever role she's assigned remains deliberately ambiguous. With Janice, even maternal instinct feels like a performance piece designed to collapse under its own intensity. Here's the part of Tony's leadership everyone ignores. He destroys the future while complaining he doesn't have one. The hulking enforcer assigned to Tony, affectionately remembered by some as Muscles Marinara, less affectionately remembered by others as that guy who couldn't remember to count to 10, stands as one of the show's most squandered assets. His role begins with promise, delivers exactly 2 memorable moments, and then evaporates with the efficiency of a character the writers clearly forgot existed. The polite explanation is that after his ill-fated altercation with Tony, the character was meant to drift quietly off stage. The less polite explanation is that he was never given more than a driver's level purpose to begin with. In fact, the actor's real-life arrest conveniently provided the show with an exit ramp, which the production used with unceremonious speed. Yet his disappearance highlights a far larger theme, the show's relentless cycle of generational violence and self-sabotage. The older generation refuses to hand down power, the younger generation refuses to be worthy of it, and the entire enterprise collapses under the weight of mutual disappointment. Tony's fixation on the so-called greatest generation coexists with his resentment toward them as failed parents. Meanwhile, he and his contemporaries dutifully repeat the pattern, effectively strangling any potential successor before one can emerge. The bodyguard's brief existence fits neatly into this pathology. He represents exactly what Tony claims to need, a young, strong recruit, and exactly what Tony cannot tolerate, a hint of a future that does not revolve entirely around himself. The story uses him to demonstrate that Tony can still physically dominate the next generation, even as he systematically destroys every viable member of it. It is a small example within a larger pattern. Tony knows the organization requires new, loyal soldiers, yet he ensures there will be none. The older men are burnt-out relics, the younger ones are distracted, disloyal, or coked out of their minds, dreaming of Hollywood or fashion instead of mafia hierarchy. A pyramid scheme without fresh recruits tends to collapse, an observation Tony seems aware of, but utterly unwilling to act on. Some viewers wonder what potential the character even had. After all, he was merely a driver. But by that standard, the show has an entire graveyard of underused muscle, including an NFL legend who chauffeured Tony for a few episodes and barely got a line out of it. If wasted potential were an Olympic sport, the casting department could have taken home gold. In the end, the bodyguard served his thematic purpose, a disposable symbol of the future that Tony simultaneously demands and destroys. The tragedy is not that the character vanished, but that in Tony's world, this disappearing act is the rule, not the exception. Here's the real reason mobsters cling to cash. Illegality isn't a necessity, it's an identity. The criminal underworld loves to posture as a shadow version of corporate America, yet somehow the concept of legitimate business remains an exotic, nearly mythical creature in its natural habitat. Across the entire saga, the most above-board venture on display is Tony's brief stint as landlord of Caputo's Poultry, a role that only becomes relevant once he decides to sell the property to a real estate temptress and a pair of aggressively eager investors. After that, one is treated to the parade of legitimate fronts: Barone Sanitation, Massarone Brothers Construction, and similar institutions that serve mainly as filing cabinets for union benefits and no-show jobs. They technically operate, yes, but only in the sense that a casino technically operates even while its basement hosts an active sewer leak. Alongside these semi-legitimate shells sit the more colorful establishments: Satriales, the Bing, the Crazy Horse, places where the sausage of actual business is made right next to the sausage of felonies. These are often the rewards of loan sharking debts, curiosities the crew strangely opts not to bust out, perhaps out of sentimentality, or simply because the bloodstains would be a nuisance to mop. Tony himself briefly muses about deploying stolen drug cash in the open, perhaps even in the stock market, before immediately pivoting to insider trading with the enthusiasm of a child who cannot resist touching a stovetop. Wobistics becomes the predictable result. Even the parole-bound old-timers note the value of square jobs, purely for the optics. Parole officers, federal agents, and nosy onlookers all enjoy the illusion of honest labor, even if the men in question last performed an honest hour of work during the Carter administration. Meanwhile, personal finance within this esteemed fraternity resembles a paranoid dragon's horde. Cash, grenades, AK-47s, gold coins, and delicate figurines are stuffed into the recesses of family homes as though preparing for an apocalypse themed around both war and tchotchkes. Offshore accounts through Slava offer an additional layer of secrecy for those who prefer not to store their assets next to cereal boxes. Only Christopher appears to have skipped the hoarding tradition, substances occupying the hiding spaces where cash might otherwise go. So why the refusal to invest in real estate, franchise businesses, or anything that looks remotely like financial planning? Why stash hundreds of thousands under mattresses instead of acquiring something that wouldn't be instantly confiscated if the bears, or more accurately, federal agents, happen to descend? The answer lies in the exquisite absurdity of trying to present vast, unexplained liquidity as the fruits of a modest garbage consultant salary. Attempting to purchase real property requires W-2s, documented income, and the kind of paper trail that does not involve duffel bags, cashier's checks carefully kept below the $10,000 reporting threshold, or nervous explanations involving completely legitimate savings. Without legitimate earnings, assets become prosecutorial catnip, easily seized, cataloged, and auctioned off before their owners even finish invoking their Fifth Amendment rights. This absence of financial prudence extends beyond property. Racetracks, pizza joints, union posts, these exist within the ecosystem, but never as paths to genuine stability. They remain performative wallpaper, decorative claims of respectability draped over the same hollow core. Underneath it all lies the defining trait, a preference for getting away with things. Sociopaths do not chase legitimacy. They chase the thrill of evasion. Even if legitimate millions lay neatly arranged on a silver platter, the illicit path still beckons. If you aren't cheating, you aren't trying, isn't just a mantra. It's the closest thing this world has to a mission statement. And thus the cycle continues. Mountains of cash hidden in attics, the eternal fear of confiscation, and the steadfast refusal to embrace genuine financial security. After all, why settle for stability when the real prize is the intoxicating belief that outsmarting the system is its own form of wealth? Never take a paycheck at face value. Some are nothing more than polished laundering tools. The mythology of the no-show, no-work job tends to wobble between urban legend and IRS-friendly fairy tale. Yet the basic mechanics are surprisingly mundane. Yes, the checks were real. Yes, they were deposited. And yes, the recipients graciously kicked up as expected. The entire arrangement functioned less as a job and more as a laundering device with a W-2 attached. A convenient way to transform questionably acquired cash into something that looked admirably wholesome on paper. In on-screen depictions, these positions appear as a loyalty prize for the initiated. A tidy, unearned salary accompanied by the sort of benefits that would make any legitimate worker wonder why they bother with actual labor. Health insurance? Included. Pension credits? Naturally. All part of the perk package for those whose skill set leaned less toward construction and more toward creative revenue acquisition. The accounting behind this spectacle, of course, raises the inevitable question: who exactly believed this was a plausible employment record? The facade relied on the illusion of a genuine payroll, bi-weekly checks, tax documentation, everything short of an appearance on the job site. The beauty of the operation was that it allowed illicit profits to masquerade as honest wages without anyone lifting so much as a shovel. Meanwhile, in the real world, modern union work bears little resemblance to its mid-century caricature. What once included enclaves of mob-tinged influence has largely evolved into above-board organizations offering enviable health coverage, pensions, and the audacious notion that workers deserve weekends and overtime pay. These gains, often taken for granted, exist because earlier generations fought for them with considerably more effort than was ever required to cash a no-show paycheck. In short, the no-work job was indeed a paycheck, just not a career. The real work, negotiating legitimate labor rights, happened elsewhere, far from the paper employees perfecting the ancient art of getting paid for doing nothing at all. Want to meet the only man in Phil's crew who actually understood the value of strategy over screaming? If the standard for leadership in the New York organization were steadiness, judgment, and basic emotional regulation, Albi would have ascended to the top without resistance. Unfortunately, the bar was set by Phil Leotardo, a man who repeatedly demonstrated why he should never have been entrusted with anything more complicated than a lunch order. Albi, by contrast, spent the series quietly modeling what actual leadership might look like. He consistently operated as the lone adult in a room full of Phil's tantrums and Butchie's nervous tics. When Phil launched into hysterics about Tony Soprano, Albi provided an accurate, measured read of the situation. Calm where Butchie was frantic. Rational where Phil was theatrical. When Phil descended into drunken fury, Albi attempted the impossible, injecting reason into a man who made empty stomach governance his operating philosophy. His instincts on broader conflicts were equally clear-eyed. He protested the fantastical notion of wiping out an entire rival family, recognized the pointlessness of Phil's self-destructive war, and urged a truce long before anyone else could admit the obvious. He pushed back against the dismissive attitude toward Bobby Baccalieri, understanding, radically, that competence is not determined by birthplace. Even his lighter advice, like encouraging Phil to take up biking and get some air, reflected the kind of basic human maintenance Phil desperately needed. The great irony is that Albi's wisdom made him precisely the kind of figure a boss should be: tempered, reasonable, and capable of speaking truth to power, which of course made him entirely unsuitable for Phil's regime. Some even suggest he was the quiet informant feeding Brooklyn's concerns to the FBI, a possibility that only underscores how thoroughly he grasped the dysfunction around him. Phil's leadership ultimately ran on fumes and wounded pride, sustained by a diet of skipped meals and too much wine. Albi, meanwhile, was usually seen eating, perhaps the simplest symbol of why he remained grounded while Phil drifted into delusional self-importance. One man starved himself into poor judgment. The other nourished himself well enough to maintain a functioning brain. In a universe with sensible succession planning, Albi would have taken the reins. Instead, New York got Phil, a cautionary tale in the dangers of placing power in the hands of a man who couldn't even manage dinner. If you want to know who topped the charts in Tony Soprano worship, you're in the right place. The eternal question of who groveled hardest before Tony Soprano invites a spirited competition, but the contenders are remarkably consistent. Nearly all of them had their moments of Olympic-level sycophancy. Paulie Walnuts, for instance, treated flattery like a full-time occupation. His acts of devotion ranged from petty sabotage, undercutting anyone who might threaten his standing, to more theatrical displays, such as showering Carmela with lavish gifts in hopes the goodwill would trickle back to the throne. He even managed to fold murder into his resume of loyalty, eliminating vulnerable targets for pocket change if it meant polishing his image in Tony's eyes. If Tony wanted a lapdog, Paulie happily arrived with the collar already fastened. Yet Ralph Cifaretto remains a compelling finalist, a man who could spend hours trash-talking anyone within reach, suddenly transformed into a model subordinate the moment Tony appeared. His bravado evaporated instantly, replaced with the pliability of a folding chair. The infamous jacket incident stands as a monument to his desperate need for approval, a gesture so clumsy and overwrought, it practically begged for ridicule. Ralph's downfall came not from lack of talent, but from forgetting the one skill he had perfected: abject capitulation. And while the hierarchy of sycophants is crowded, the list is not complete without acknowledging those who managed to pay tribute in more unconventional ways. Deference in Tony's world took many forms, and not all involved mere flattery. Still, when tallying the grand total of obsequiousness, measured in gifts, groveling, and assorted humiliations, it becomes difficult to dethrone Polly. No rival, however enthusiastic, ever matched the sheer range of his devotion. Tony's ego may have been a communal project, but Polly treated it like sacred duty. If you're trying to understand Tony Soprano, start with the simple question no one asks. Was he smart or just born lucky? Tony Soprano's reputation oscillates between criminal genius and walking catastrophe, and the evidence, both damning and flattering, piles up on both sides. On one hand, he demonstrates genuine strategic instinct. Removing Feach before the old-timer could blossom into a full-scale liability was a clean, calculated maneuver. In moments like these, Tony appears perfectly engineered for the ecosystem he inhabits: predatory, perceptive, and capable of decisive action. And then he picks up a pen. The infamous love note to his therapist, complete with spelling that suggests a hostage situation between him and the English language, reminds everyone that book smart is not part of the package. He understands the emotional mechanics of therapy well enough to manipulate it, but intellectual rigor is not among his natural gifts. Still, the universe has a remarkable habit of clearing his path. Capos poised to testify conveniently expire. Threats to his power, Richie, Jr., either get dispatched by others or unravel without requiring his direct competence. Fortune repeatedly intervenes to rescue him from the consequences of his own miscalculations. His ascent, too, leans heavily on nepotistic scaffolding. Born into a family where power was a birthright, he capitalized effectively on the platform handed to him, but the platform arrived pre-assembled. This is the central irony. He is, in many ways, the prototype of the man who starts on third base and congratulates himself for hitting a triple. The comparison becomes even sharper next to AJ, who manages to squander his far cushier starting position with almost athletic dedication. Tony, by contrast, at least knows how to leverage what he's inherited. Yet the pedestal beneath him is lower than he believes. Much of his perceived intelligence comes from being surrounded by people whose own limitations make him look sharper by comparison. For every genuinely sound decision, he offers a trio of avoidable disasters: choices derailed by ego, impulse, or sheer carelessness. His self-image, inflated and unexamined, increasingly dictates his judgment, and by seasons 5 and 6, the consequences of believing his own mythology begin to crystallize. In the end, Tony possesses a kind of hyena cunning, instinctive, opportunistic, and effective within a narrow terrain. Outside that terrain, spelling, foresight, humility, or anything requiring disciplined thought, the brilliance fades quickly. His power is real, but so is his luck, and the line between the two is far thinner than he ever allows himself to admit. Subscribe.